So something that my teachers have always done before they begin a Dharma talk is to make an aspiration. Because anything that we do creates some energy, right? And so how are we going to use this energy is very important. So something that we always do is, at the beginning, we set an intention. In the middle of a Dharma talk, you have other thoughts, you think about other things, you may answer your phone. Please don't. But still, the original direction of that energy, if you set it correctly, can go very far. But if you don't give any direction to your energy, then it is not much use, actually. So this is why, before we begin something like this, any kind of practice, it's a good idea to take a moment and decide on a direction for this energy. So, personally for me, I hope that today we can come together and all learn something about the Dharma together, and that this is helpful, not just in our own lives, but for this whole world. So, may we have a fruitful learning time together today. After I gave a talk here in sort of early April, and right after the talk finished, I spent about a week to go bow to some of the senior monastics that I have a relationship with in Korea, various monks at different temples. And I went to one temple and I sat down and I bowed to this monk, one of these monks who's my teacher, and he says, "So how are you doing these days?" And I said, "I'm okay." He says, "Oh, at your home temple, do you have to do any of these Dharma talks, these pope kinds of things?" And I said, "Oh, I just gave one in Seoul, actually." And he says, "How did it go?" I said, "I don't think I want to do it again." And he says, "Why?" I said, I don't feel like I have I'm not some great practitioner. I'm not some great scholar. You graduate a 4-year seminary, that doesn't actually mean much. It's not like a PhD. It's not like years and years being a lecturer in one of these traditional seminaries. I don't think I can do this. I just don't have the qualifications. And he looks at me and says, "Why do you think you have to have qualifications? This is not about you teaching something to other people. Sit down with people and learn together." And when he said this, it really hit me. It was like, I've gone about this all the wrong way. So from the viewpoint of us all learning together, I actually the reason I chose the topic I did today was because I made a mistake in my first Dharma talk. I confused two different, very important Buddhist teachings. One is the teaching on impermanence, or we say no self sometimes. And the other is the teaching on interdependent origination, which is a really big word. I confused the two of these, and that really bugged me. I think I probably spent 2-3 weeks thinking about how could I make such a basic mistake. And then I talked to this monk. He says, view it as learning together. So today, I'm here to correct the mistake I made in my first Dharma talk. So bear with me if I make more mistakes. I don't know what to do. We'll find some way to correct them next time. But it's kind of recognizing reality is a really heavy sort of a topic. Don't think about it like that. These teachings, we call them the 3 marks of existence, which is another really big way to say things. But quick question, what's the first thing the Buddha taught? Four Noble Truths. I can always count on you. What's the first of the Four Noble Truths? Suffering. So, the Buddha taught that, and actually this word suffering, in English at least, and also in the Chinese, and they say go, the Chinese. So whether you say it in Korean or you say it in English, it's, suffering, which is a very negative feeling, actually. Life is suffering. Most people hear that and they think that Buddhism is some really negative, unhappy kind of a practice, when it's not that at all. The original word in Sanskrit didn't mean suffering the way we think of suffering, Christ on the cross, that kind of suffering. It actually meant unsatisfactory or dissatisfactory. When we think suffering, we think, big sickness, lots of pain. But when we think dissatisfactory, it's like, my coffee got cold before I could drink it. We don't usually think of that as suffering, right? But we recognize that as dissatisfactory. Things not quite matching what we want. This is the first noble truth, not big suffering, like horrible war zone kind of stuff, although that counts. But actually, nearly everything, every single day, is just a little bit off. And that's just the way life is. Good or bad, That's not the point. It's just, that's what it is. Things are a little off. That's the first noble truth. It's also the first of what we call these 3 marks of existence. The second thing is about the world around us. You know, the things that we see, the things that we interact with. And can anybody tell me some of the characteristics of the world around us? Anybody? Well, one thing is, you know, anybody here a W.B. Yeats fan? Okay. Slouching toward Bethlehem. Things fall apart. Yes, okay. Things fall apart. This is the state of the world. Nothing stays the way that we think it will or we want it to. I was in the office just a minute ago with, I brought everybody I know. So actually, the 3 nuns up here are sisters of mine from Kangwon. We went to school together, and then we have another doban back here. But Dokjang-s님 remarked, he says, hey, did you get a new changsam? Because usually I have a really raggedy, like, I have a changsam that's got like patches everywhere. It's got coffee stains. You know it's my clothing if it's got coffee stains on it. I finally spilled coffee on my new casa, so now it's mine for sure. But you know, so my old casa is just a mess. You know, it's falling apart. These seams, or I guess these creases, tend to wear very quickly. So you know, mine was all torn and ripped, and now I'm wearing a new casa, or a new changsam, so it looks nice. But why did I need a new changsam? Because the old one fell apart. Because that's what everything does. Things fall apart. Well, this is the second mark of existence. That this material, phenomenal world around us is constantly breaking down. Things don't remain the same. So that's what's happening with the world around us. But then, of course, what about the world inside our heads? What's happening in there? Are things constant in here? It's only the world outside that's changing, right? There's something always the same in here. Is this true or is this not true? What's true? Is it changing or not changing? Changing. Okay, the nuns say changing. Who's with the nuns? Okay. So that's the third mark of existence. That this external world is changing, but also actually in here is also changing. This thing we call I is also actually always changing. This linguistic convention, this trick of language, we say I. I shouldn't hit the microphone. That's probably a bad idea. We always say I, or mine, or me. We give some sort of unitary, we give a unitary form to something that actually doesn't stay. You know, the I that you were when you were 5, is that the same mind as you have now? Some days. Yeah, it depends on the situation, right? Some days you revert back to 5-year-old. But, you know, the fact that the self is also always changing, the way that we put this actually, if the outside world is impermanent, if all phenomena are impermanent, then the I, it's not just impermanent, actually we say it's empty. And this emptiness, this is one of those things, again, you know, people hear, oh, you know, Buddhism says that everything is suffering and I don't like suffering, so I don't like Buddhism. And then they hear that the I is empty and they think, well, but I'm not empty. Even if I'm changing all the time, I've got a lot going on in here. So how can you call that empty? All this emptiness means is that there's nothing solid and permanent that you can hold on to. Just like, I can hold on to this glass as long as I don't break it. The moment I break it, it's not, I guess it's a cover. In America, we would actually use this as the saucer, but, it's only a glass saucer until it breaks. And I promise you, it will break eventually. Anybody who's owned a set of fine crystal ware, like my mother, knows that these things break. That's what happens in life. So this is only functioning as long as it's whole. And you can only call it a saucer as long as it can function in that way. The moment it breaks, it stops being whatever it was. And it will break because that's the way things are. Has anybody ever gone to, Korea doesn't have a tradition of glass windows, but if anybody's ever gone to like really old, 100 or 200-year-old buildings in the West, and they have glass windows, what do you notice about them? They warp. Why do they warp? It's funny, glass isn't a solid. I don't know if this is glass or crystal, but at any rate, glass isn't a solid, and it flows. So over time, it warps. So when you walk into an old building in Europe or in America, the glass will be thinner at the top, thicker towards the bottom, and it creates a distortion because over time it's been flowing. So even your glass windows are not permanent. That's the outside world, and the inside world is the same. So this thing, the only reason we say empty is because we tend to think of something as permanent. What is it empty of? Permanent existence. It's not empty of function. This is really important in Buddhism. Things are still functioning. I may not exist like a soul, but I still get up in the morning. I still talk to people. As an individual, I have a history because the mind comes with a body. So you come in this nice, neat package that's just perfectly built for walking around thinking it's going to last forever, which is not the case at all. So these are the 3 marks of existence. Let's see who's paying attention. What are they? You can give them in Korean even if you want. Okay, first thing is suffering. Existence is unsatisfactory. The second thing, impermanence. The outside world, all these phenomena, always changing. The third thing, the self is also always changing, so the self is impermanent. So we say no self, or empty of self. These are the 3 marks of existence. And it was this second mark that I messed up last time. Because things are impermanent, because things break down, just like W.B. Yeats said. Because things break down, they're impermanent, and what I confused that with was the way to check if things are impermanent or not, which is what we call the 12 links of dependent origination, or sometimes interdependent origination. Does anybody know them? I didn't, so I had to write them down, and I've got them in front of me, so I won't cheat yet. Does anybody know them? It starts with ignorance, I'll tell you that much. Ignorance. Action is the next one. Action or impulse, sometimes they say in English. So I'm just going to rattle them off because it appears that nobody knows. So you've got ignorance, action, consciousness. Consciousness is just the basic mental functioning that we have. It's not even a lot of complicated thinking yet. We're not at Einstein's level yet. It's just the basic thinking. This gives rise to something called name and form. Name just means identity. That's the inside world. Form is the outside world of phenomena. So it gives rise to name and form. And then the 6 sense organs, which are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. And then the mind is also considered a sense organ, actually. Well, if you've got the 6 sense organs, then you can also now have contact between these organs and, different things. The eyes can see, the ears will hear because they'll come in contact with the sound, the nose will smell smells, the tongue will taste, the skin or, your fingertips will feel objects, and your mind begins to think. So this basic consciousness that came before isn't so much like thinking about things as it is the basis on which thoughts can arise. Anyway, so that happens. Contact with all these external phenomena begins to happen. Now, when you feel when you come in contact with something, what happens next? You hand a cup of water to somebody, and you don't tell them if it's hot or cold. As soon as they touch it, what happens? They feel something. There's a sensation, right? So that's the next step in this. After sensations, now, this is a bit of a leap, but so let's say, in my case, what would it be? Cotton sheets. I love cotton sheets. They're very cool in the summer. They're nice. I really like cotton sheets, and I'll tell you what, if I had some cotton sheets in Korea, it'd be great. But I can't get cotton sheets in Korea, so I got to call my mom. Oh, but I wonder if she's willing to do that. I wonder how expensive it's going to be. All of this process, it started with a feeling. I didn't even start with I like. You feel something, and you develop an idea about it. I like or I don't like. So after sensation, after feeling, craving arises. Yeah?
Before craving, I think it's attachment.
No. Craving comes, you want something, so you get attached to getting it. First craving, and after that is attachment. We can also say grasping. The Sino-Korean word for attachment is 애착, and it combines both of these, actually. A is craving, and chak means to hold. But actually, the word that they use in this, at least in the Chinese, they don't use the word chak, they use the word chui. which is more like grasping after something. Because you may get it or not, we don't know. But you do want to get it, and that's this action of grasping. And that comes after craving, because you have to want something to go after it, generally speaking. So that's why craving comes first, attachment or grasping comes after. So after that, then we say coming into being or existing happens. And this is a little bit complicated, so we'll spend probably a lot of time on this. We'll learn together, because I'm not so good on this either. So after that, existing happens. And existing is not necessarily being born yet. And we'll go through some examples that make this, I hope, a little bit more clear, because this is pretty vague right now. Existing, and then birth. And if you're born, or if something comes into being, what naturally happens next? We're back to the Four Noble Truths, by the way. What naturally happens next? No, not suffering. Old age, sickness, and death. So these are the 12 links of dependent origination. And actually, it said that this is what the Buddha understood when he attained enlightenment. So he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he sees the morning star, and boom, something in his head opens. And what is traditionally said in the sutras is that what he was contemplating were these 12 links of interdependent origination. Because anytime you say, well, this is something and you believe that it's permanent and it can't change, what you've just denied is the way that things come together, form, abide for a time, and then fall apart. And what the Buddha was doing was watching the way phenomena and also mental phenomena, his own thoughts, were coming into existence, arising, abiding for a time, and then dissipating. He watched this process, and this is what he gained insight into, they say. Because you can watch moment to moment. This is what we do when we sit meditation usually. We just watch our mind go crazy. One of my early teachers is one of Zen Master Sung San's students in America. Her name is Bobby Rhodes. And Bobby Rhodes one time, she said, when you first start meditating, you spend about the first couple of years really feeling good about your practice. Your mind begins to calm down, you get some sort of peace of mind, everything's great. And then after about year 3, you begin to think you're a really bad practitioner. Why? Because that's when you begin to notice that everything in your mind is a mess. So before that, because most of us never stop, simply the act of sitting still brings some peace. But after you get some stability and some peace of mind and some calming down, it's like washing a piece of cloth so that it becomes white again. Once it becomes white, you begin to see all the dust. So this is what happens with the mind. Once you've gotten a little bit calm, all of the dust that's accumulating on it becomes very, very obvious. And so most practitioners, this is what Bobby Rhodes said, most practitioners think actually that their practice is getting worse right when it's actually getting better, because you're finally beginning to notice. So she says your practice will get worse. You'll think your practice is getting worse, but that actually means it's getting better. Why? Because you're beginning to see all of the stuff that's happening in your mind all the time. This constant arising and falling of thoughts. How many people here have some sort of formal training in meditation? You go to either a Shimin Sompang, or maybe you go to I know a lot of people here attend the Anguk Sonwon, or maybe you go to one of the international Zen centers, or you've participated in other groups. Anybody here have a regular practice? Show of hands. Actually, I have to put my hand down because I don't have a regular meditation practice right now. So we've got a few people. If you do this regularly, this is what you begin to notice, is that thoughts are constantly arising and falling, arising and falling, arising and falling. And a lot of your meditation practice is just learning to notice them. It's just that when you first begin to finally notice them, you feel like you're going nuts. Because most of us have never bothered to look at how the mind functions in this way. So this momentary rising and falling is also part of the 12 links of interdependent origination. Why? Because we started with ignorance. Which is the cause. You don't know something, so something happens. And you begin to want something because you come in contact with something. This is all what this is talking about. But in the big picture, this also describes how we're born. How we come into this body, why we live the life that we do. And traditional Buddhism says that when you die, you're reborn. We have this theory of rebirth. Although, has anybody read Stephen Batchelor? Okay. You've read everything. Stephen Batchelor is big on Buddhism without beliefs, the Buddhist atheist. He says you don't need karma, you don't need rebirth, none of this is necessary to actually get a lot out of Buddhist practice. So, whether you believe in karma and rebirth or not, you can still see the way that these 12 links of dependent origination function in your life. If you're a karma and rebirth kind of a Buddhist, then this begins to take on a very long view because it happens over the course of lifetimes. But at any rate, this is, because things are interrelated, that's why they are impermanent. That's why we have no self. So let's take a moment, go back and look a little bit closer at what these 12 links exactly are. So I said the first link was ignorance. Specifically, what are you ignorant of? I'm sorry? But can you define ignorance for me first?
Ignorance as a concept, Buddhist, is the art of not knowing.
Okay. Yeah, that also works. Ignorance, we often say that the fundamental ignorance is a belief in the self. That's how I was taught, which is another way to put it. Yeah. Basically, I think we're saying the same thing, just coming at it from different sides. So we believe in a self. And because we believe in something, we begin to act on the basis of that. Has anybody, do you remember how you learned how to ride a bicycle? Does anybody remember this? Okay. Was it a painful experience or not? It was pretty painful. But the way that most of us learn how to ride a bike is we have to kick off of something. When you get rid of the training wheels, and you first have to learn, if you want to get started, you have to kick off of something. So every time you make an action, every time you move, whether it's in the mind or with the body, first you need something to push off of. And the foundation, erroneously, that we push off of when we're ignorant, when we believe in permanence, is that ignorance. That's this foundation that kicks this cycle off. So we begin to act. Why? Because there's something that we're pushing off of an idea. This is the funny thing. These are all ideas. These are all ideas, and yet we manage to somehow make material action out of them. That's the really crazy thing about our minds and how powerful they are. So this idea in a permanent self becomes the basis for action. Why? Because if I really exist, then I can interact with other things that really exist. So then we act and we begin to move. But when you move, again, riding a bike or swimming, if anybody's done this, or if you're running and you go out running in the wind, when you begin to move, what happens? In the water, or if you're on a bike, something going fast, you're in a car. There's some sensation of wind or water. Have you ever had this happen? Anybody? You'll be aware of this if you think about it. Most of us don't think. That's the problem. We're not paying attention. That's what's going on. But if you pay attention, once you begin to move, an awareness arises. There's wind against my skin, or there's water against my skin. Or if you're in a car and you're going fast and you roll the windows down, there's that sound of the air rushing by. And have you ever done the thing with your hand? This is something fun to do if you can get on a highway. This consciousness, this is all I'm talking about, an awareness of something. You're not thinking good or bad, you don't want it, you just, wind, or water. Well, that's this consciousness that I'm talking about, this third link, well, that's what it is. Well, once you're aware of that, then a relationship develops, doesn't it? That's the wind, this is my skin. I am swimming. Or I'm sorry, I guess it would be water. But, so once you become aware of something, then you develop a relationship with that. And that's called name and form. Name is what we give ourselves. We name ourselves I as a general rule. Form is everything outside. And we also give names to everything outside. That's a clock, that's a cushion, that's a moktak, that's a glass, that's water. Because in order to have a relationship with something, you have to begin to imagine it as separate. And again, this goes back to that first link. We believe that there is something here, so it can have an oppositional relationship with something else over there. This fundamental dichotomy is ignorance, this belief in permanence, because that's what begins to create divisions. If you have one, then you have to have two. One is only one if it's in relation to two, actually, conceptually. But so this conceptualization, this splitting of the world into oppositional things, this is name and form. This is just what we call it. Name is what happens inside. Form is what happens outside. Well, after that, because, if you're going to have name and form and you've got now a body, this, again, if you want to take the lifetimes view, now you've got a body that can develop this. But if we just take it as an example, we can say we now have an awareness of a body. And we have organs to begin to interact with these different phenomena. And the 6 organs are, again, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body or skin, and then the mind. So we become aware that we have these and that they can interact with the world. And once they begin to interact and have contact, again, after contact, sensation arises. And babies are very simple, right? So babies haven't developed a lot of extra thinking about things, but what is one thing that a baby most definitely has? Like, dislike, mind. Babies are very clear about this. If they don't like something, they scream. If they like something, they calm down. It's very easy to see from the time we're children already, very quickly, because this is just part of the function of having a body. If you have a body and you've got all of these organs, this is just what the mind does. Because this is our fundamental state, is to believe in permanence. This is why ignorance is a foundational problem for us. But, so at any rate, contact, sensation, and after sensation you develop like and dislike. And again, if name and form is also a fundamental splitting, conceptually, of the world, into this and that, between in here and out there, then like and dislike is an emotional response on the same level. I like this, I don't like that. The world becomes split into the things we want and the things we don't want. And then there are some things that we don't much care about that are in the middle. Come or go, no problem. But what we really get involved with and spend most of our life chasing after are the things that we like and trying to avoid the things that we don't like. And actually, under the definition of this suffering that the Buddha gave, one of the definitions of suffering is losing what one wants and coming into contact or conflict with the things one wants to avoid. This is one of the definitions of this fundamental dissatisfactoriness of life. How many times have you gotten in a fight with somebody? I hope I don't have to see her today. You're round the corner in the office, and who's at the water cooler? Or you're in a meeting, and you're thinking, oh good, it's a meeting, we'll be able to get on separate sides of the table. You walk in a little bit late and there's only one seat left. And why on earth, the day that I got in a fight with so-and-so, do I have to sit next to her? I mean, this is this dissatisfactoriness, and it's coming into contact with things you don't like. Or, the biggest example of losing the things that you like is death. How many people have lost a loved one? Someone in your family? If you haven't lost someone yet, you will. I mean, I don't mean to be a downer, but this is a fundamental fact of life. Losing a loved one is one of the most powerful experiences of impermanence, loss, and I'm not putting a negative spin on grief, but an attachment that we can experience. Trying to let go of someone you have loved is one of the most difficult things you will ever do. And grief is natural. I'm not telling people not to grieve. Actually, I think that grieving is a very necessary part of our life. But if you want to see an example of what it means to have attachment be a problem, see how much difficulty and how much grief arises when you lose someone you love. And that process of trying to just get back to everyday life again. It's really, really hard. So losing what you like, coming into contact with what you don't like, and actually you could phrase it this way, having to come into contact with death, with impermanence when someone dies, is an example of one of these, is the example of coming into contact with the unpleasant, while losing your loved one to death is an example of losing what you love. So this craving and this grasping, my grandfather died now 5 years ago, and he had Alzheimer's. And if anybody has interacted with anyone with Alzheimer's, you know that this is actually a very difficult thing, because the person is actually gone long before the body dies, actually. And it was very difficult for my mother and for my aunt, because they had to watch their father go long before his body could stop suffering. They actually said that was the hardest thing. If he had died sooner, his body would have suffered less, and the family wouldn't have had to watch him deteriorate. But I remember after he died, my mother was the primary caretaker for him. We moved him up to the city where my mom and my dad lived. My mother, had to make sure that he was in a nursing home. And she had to work, so it's hard to have him at the house because they have to have 24-hour care. But when he died, on the one hand, she was so grateful because it meant his suffering was over. But on the other hand, the grieving that she went through was very intense. And there are times when she wished she could have him back. So again, this grasping, you love somebody and you develop an attachment. You love them, so that's your attachment. You lose them. The grasping is wanting that something back. There were times when she said, I just wish he were here again. I just wish I could hear his voice one more time. Another friend of mine lost his mother to brain cancer about 3 years ago, and it was really hard because she was young. At the very least, my grandfather was older, but my friend's mother was very young, and she died, and it was very difficult. And he says he's still 3 years on, he still has not come to terms with the fact that she will not be there when he goes home, and he wishes that she could come back. So this grasping is that feeling. I don't want these things to remain just terms for you. They're sensations, they're things that you can experience if you're paying attention. So you have to know what this grasping feels like if you're going to watch what happens when it arises in the mind. So this feeling of yearning, of longing, of wanting. I'm not talking about how I feel in the morning and I want a cup of coffee. I mean, I have a really big caffeine addiction, but this is something far deeper than even that. It's woven into our very being, this grasping, this yearning after something. And of course, what is the biggest thing that we yearn for, that we grasp after? Our own lives. Actually, that's what we yearn for the most, is our own being. Yes, because we're people and because we have relationships and because we belong to families and circles of friends, we have these yearnings and these graspings toward other people, but basically, most of us are interested in our own lives. And that's what we really want and yearn after. So anything that builds up the idea of the self and our own existence is actually how we begin to orient ourselves. Has anybody been in a situation where they cannot do anything? They're just like, they have no skills in an environment. They're normally really good and on top of their game, and then they find themselves in a situation where they don't know anything? I went to Kangwon. I went to this school called Umunsa. And, in America, I was a fairly, capable person. You tell me to cook. You tell me to get into the kitchen. If I have to be the one to cook for a retreat, I could do it. You want me to fix something, I could probably take care of it, or I know who to call. I speak the language fluently. And then I went to Kangwon. We say Kangwon. I went to seminary. Even I spoke Korean, to be honest, it wasn't quite enough. It was a second language. So I had a problem with the language. I don't understand how things work. I can't cook rice. I know this is like a travesty in Korea, but for the life of me, I can't cook rice. Now, Koreans can't cook bread they can't bake bread for the most part, but we're not eating bread every day, we're eating rice every day. Bread is not the point right now. I can't do rice. I can't do the panchan. I don't know how to make kimchi. The way Koreans clean is very particular. I was not a very neat person. When my parents came to visit me right after I got my first precepts, and my no-sunim and my unsa-sunim, my grand teacher and my teacher said, oh, your parents come to our temple, you showed them your room and all the rest, and my room is really messy actually for a nun. I'm always in trouble at home. They're like, can't you pick up your room? I'm like, I did, So there's a difference in neatness here. But my parents walked into my room, and of course my unsa-sunim was like, maybe you not show them your room, it's a little bit of a mess. My parents walk in and they're like, oh, what have these nuns done to finally get you to clean your room? So it's a matter of degree is what I'm saying. I have improved. I know the Koreans don't believe this, but it's a big improvement. Anyway, the way they clean, it's on your hands and knees, it's with rags, there's a style of living that I don't understand, to be honest. Koreans have an ability to look at a situation, partly because they've been raised in this particular culture, and they know what needs to be done, right? It's intuitive to a degree. I had no idea what needed to be done. My sisters would be like, we have to do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, I didn't even see those things. All of a sudden, I went from being average but capable in my own culture to being practically mute, if not totally, it's better to be mute actually, better than incomprehensible. I was incomprehensible. I couldn't understand what was being said. People couldn't understand what I said. I didn't understand situations. I couldn't even feed people, which is like one of the basic things. You know, like, what's the ethnic mother stereotype in America? She doesn't speak English, but she'll feed you. You know, like, it doesn't matter which ethnicity. You know, like, I couldn't even feed people. I mean, like, that's how all of a sudden incapable I became. Everything. I couldn't follow lectures, and I was always a really good student. Couldn't follow lectures. One time I got sent to do 500 or 1,000 vows of repentance, I can't remember, in our first year. I got sent to do repentance because I kept failing my Chinese exams. You know, at any rate. So, you know, like, I had to bound repentance because I couldn't study. I couldn't keep up with what was being, you know, done for work. I couldn't walk into the kitchen and be, well, at the very least, I can help in the kitchen. I couldn't even help in the kitchen. I didn't understand the cleaning schedule. And I swear it's like Koreans can communicate without speaking at all, which is the worst thing, because, you know, like, if something's said, I can at least be like, something was said and I should check about that. But if it's not said and people are just moving, it's like, oh my God, you know, so people are going this way, I'm off this way. It was horrible. It was, talk about an unsatisfactory situation. And the reason it was horrible, because in my head, I had an idea of myself as someone who can do things, capable. And I was incapable. So that idea, that existence, Sunjun, capable, did not happen. It was Sunjun, kind of a mess up, you know? So Sunjun can't study. Sunjun can't cook. Sunjun can't clean. You know, like, it was a whole bunch of things that did not mesh with my idea of myself. Actually, it's not a problem. If you can't cook, you go, you know, you do dishes. If you can't follow the situation listening, you just follow, you know, they're going now. You don't have to get upset about it, right? But because of my thinking, because of my yearning for my identity as someone, I had enormous suffering. Because of an idea. It doesn't matter, can do, cannot do. All you have to do is follow, actually. But this most basic of thirsts, this most fundamental of ideas, the idea of the self, which is the definition of ignorance. What are we ignorant of? The fact the self doesn't exist. That yearning for that idea caused me immense suffering. They can tell you, I cried for 3 years straight. You know, I'm a really big crier. And Koreans don't cry so much, right? My Sun준스님 one time, before I went to school, I lived at my home temple for a couple of years. You know, I had to sort of get my feet underneath me. And one time, I got really upset about something. I cried. My Sun준스님 pulls me aside. She says, "You cry more than any other foreigner." And I said, "That's not true. One of my seniors told me she cries more than I do." And no one believed me. But I've heard it on record that I'm not the biggest crier, actually, in our group. But, you know, like, why was I so upset all the time? Because my idea of myself and the way I had to live didn't match. That's all. Did I have major physical suffering? No, I was healthy. I had shelter. I had granted it was 3 meals of rice and kimchi every day, but I had 3 meals a day. I had people around me who wanted to help me. I had, in any other circumstances, a good situation. And the only reason I was unhappy with it was because of my idea. That's how powerful the mind is. And this is how the mind trips us up. Because we think there's a self, then we want to make this self comfortable. And then we do everything we can to make it comfortable, and then, of course, because things always change, when it gets uncomfortable, we suffer. But that yearning for some identity, that striving to make things work and things not quite working, this yearning is this craving. This sensation that I was so attached to, the sensation was the arrogance of being someone who knows something, the arrogance of being someone who does something. It's a good feeling, you know, to be the capable one. You know, like, what do we do with, you know, our kindergartners? We give them stars when they do something right. Why? Because positive reinforcement tends to work well with kids, right? This is anybody who's taught, you know, anybody who does anything with kids, who's taught or worked with people, know. What a good job, Johnny. You did such a great job. Then Johnny's going to want to do it again. But if you bad Johnny says, no way, I'm out of this game. So, you know, positive reinforcement works, but then it builds a desire for more good feeling. And that's all this is talking about. We don't have to get into, you know, former life, future life. In this very life alone, we can see how these things work. And it's an interdependent relationship, right? One thing builds off of another. The thing is, it happens so quickly and so continuously, and because most of us never stop to look at it, we think that it's just one homogeneous mass called life, when it's not. It's actually a bunch of little stages, like the links in a chain. Sure, the chain is one continuous chain, but when you break it down, it's one link linked to another. And that's what makes it long, that's what makes it what it is. But it's a bunch of things happening in conjunction, not one thing happening, all one solid whole. So all these are telling us to do is to stop and pay attention to what's happening in your mind. And of course, when we stop and pay attention, this is what we describe. This is what we see. So you grasp after something. And of course, in Zen, they say a lot, don't make anything. If anybody's, come into contact with Zen Master Seung San's teachings, often he would say, don't make anything. And he's not talking about don't go out and, don't make, houses, don't make cars. He's not talking about that kind of making. He means don't make any idea in your head. Why? Because you make an idea, already you have a problem. I was just talking about how much ideas caused me problems in school. An idea of myself, when actually my situation was not that hard and not that bad. I only suffered because of my own thinking. No one made me suffer. At any rate, so this existing, often again you get into traditional Buddhism, they talk about existing as, the consciousness coming into being again and ready to take birth in a new body again. We don't have to go there. We can be Stephen Batchelor about this. Existing, coming into existence, all that means is you're making another idea. Another idea of the self. I suffered for a really long time in Kangwon because the idea of myself that I'd had before wasn't working so well, which is capable American, and then I become, totally mess up American in Kangwon, can't do anything. And then I get into my 4th year and I start making another idea. Now I'm going to be studious American. I start studying. But what did I do? I made another idea of myself, actually. Another idea of myself, another identity came into being. So that's all of this means. You don't have to memorize all 12 of them unless you plan on taking, one of these Popsa exam that I know that they have people do sometimes, or unless you plan on becoming a nun or a monk, in which case you do have to memorize this stuff. I think I mentioned this last time. One of my sisters in Kangwon said one time, she said, if I'd known we were going to have to study this much, I wouldn't have ordained. She wanted to practice. She was like, I'm going to be a practicing Snim. And then she gets to school and they're like, you got to memorize this, and this. And she's like, you know what? Not my game. She memorized the stuff and she's done fine, but she said, I didn't know we had to study this much. You don't have to memorize all of this. What you do have to do is be aware of the way the mind works. And of course, you want to do that. You don't sit around memorizing terms. You need to practice. But at any rate, these 12 links of dependent origination are how the mind interacts with the world. And both the mind and the world are impermanent. So, and I did this last time as well. One thing that you can get really stuck in Buddhism is the emptiness and the impermanence of everything. You can look at everything and say, nothing exists, and it's sort of nihilistic, and it's really, there's not a lot of fruitfulness in this. So let's look at this from the other side. So everything, all states of the mind depend on one another. They all build on one another. Our suffering, our attachment, it's all interrelated. That also means that our liberation, our happiness, and our peace of mind are also interrelated. I started with this aspiration. The first kind of Buddhism that I actually came in contact with was Tibetan Buddhism. I spent a semester abroad in Nepal. Why Nepal? I don't even know. It was college. I had 3 months off, and it's like, where am I going to go? The farthest place possible, and that was Nepal at that time. So I went to Nepal, and I just got lucky and had a friend who was studying Buddhism in Kathmandu at that time, and so Ravenna says you should call Rhiannon, so I call Rhiannon. Rhiannon says, "Oh, you're in Kathmandu. Let's go to a Dharma talk," because she's a Buddhist. I said, "Okay." So she takes me to a Dharma talk, and that's how I began engaging the Buddha Dharma. And later I did a 10-day teaching retreat, and there was a Swiss monk who was leading the retreat for us. And someone asked him, what is prayer? Because Tibetans pray a lot. It's it's a really big thing in Tibetan Buddhism. And before every Dharma talk, there'd be all this mumbo jumbo, all in Tibetan, and people are just like whatever. And someone said, why all the praying? What is prayer? And this monk gave a very interesting answer. He said, prayer is the bridge between intention and action. It's not about asking for miracles. It's not about making something happen that wasn't supposed to. It's about putting your thoughts into practice. There are 3 kinds of karma in Buddhism. Does anybody know what they are? Karma, and I don't mean karma like my karma ran over your dogma kind of karma. I don't mean that. Karma here means action. So there are 3 kinds of action in Buddhism. Does anybody know what they are? Action of the body, so physical actions. Words, speech, actions of they literally say actions of the mouth, but it means speech. And then actions of the mind. So these are the 3 kinds of karma or actions in Buddhism. And I should have looked it up, but I forgot. In a sutra, the Buddha actually says, of these 3, the actions of the mind are the most powerful. Why? Because they determine actually what you say, and they determine what you do. So, yeah. Okay. The mind. Okay. The mind is like, again, I'm going to use the word foundation here. The mind is like a basis. There's sort of this base mind that's capable of having some kind of thought. But thoughts in this case are like mental. We say, oh, I had a thought, right? I don't know. I mean, and the reason I don't know is not only because it's complicated, and this is something I've tried to understand, but because there are a number of different frameworks to address this. The way that I have come to understand it is that when we say mind, what we mean is some sort of basic capability, some sort of foundational capability to think. But there are different levels of thought. We say, oh, she did that in a dream, or she was unconscious. But obviously, she still has the capability to be conscious. It's just for a moment, there's not much happening. Dreams are also thoughts, but they're usually, in Yogacara, they're related to memory. It's a function of memory, actually. So they're really conscious level thoughts, very intentional actions. And here, I'm talking about intentional actions or volition. What I'm talking about here with this idea of these 3 actions, I don't mean like this basic foundational mind. I mean intentional actions, things we do with a purpose. I'm going to go there. We say that, and then what we do, we get up and we go. Or, another, intention or volition, aspiration. I want to sort of keep a positive spin on this. Aspiration is an intentional thought. I really hope that what happens here today benefits others. Now, I don't know how I'm going to make that happen, to be honest, other than sharing, a little bit of what I've learned, and hopefully being able we can make some clarity together. But still, I have that intentional thought, and we say there's a legal difference in America, at least, between intentionally killing somebody and killing someone on accident. One is murder, one is homicide. And one is involuntary manslaughter, I think. But why? Because intention matters. The result is the same if someone is injured or someone is hurt. The result's the same, but was it done on purpose or not? Oftentimes, again, talk about conflict. You get in a fight with somebody. I don't know if they meant to or not. So you go, if they're hopefully what you do, whether you like them or not, you go and you check. Hey, yesterday you said this, and I'm not really sure what you meant by it, but it really hurt my feelings. I wanted to let you know, and I wanted to check it. Do you really think that dress looks hideous on me? Or whatever it is. And oftentimes, if you don't hold a grudge, if someone says, I had no idea you would hear it that way, that's not what I meant at all, then oftentimes we can sort of unravel this conflict, right? Intention matters to us. And that's what I'm talking about with this with this mental action, these thoughts. I'm talking specifically here about volitional or intentional thinking, not just the idle thoughts. We also have idle thoughts, that just sort of appear out of nowhere. And then, of course, they have to come from somewhere, and that basis is the mind. And they won't necessarily talk about thoughts a lot. So, it depends on what framework you're using. But again, aspiration is an intentional thought because we're constantly generating energy. Our thinking is very much energy. In Korea, it's Korean and Chinese. There's a lot of wisdom in the way that they phrase things. When someone's sitting meditation, but they're not able to bring their energy down to center, the energy goes up, and they say they get sanggi, which literally we say in English. Sometimes we'll say up energy is how we translate it with the people that I interact with. They get up energy, and they have a lot of thoughts, a lot of thinking, because it pulls your energy out of your center. And this is energy and its thoughts, but there's a physical manifestation. I talked last time as well about emotions in the body, that we tend to think emotions one side, body the other, but actually they have this really close relationship. So when you're upset, if you pay attention to the physical sensations in your body, this is a practice that one of my teachers gave me. If you notice the physical sensation in the body, often you can calm the mind down with it. So again, if you have a lot of thinking, your energy is going up. So thoughts and energy are very closely related. So all this aspiration is, instead of sending this energy into some sort of distracted thinking or not focusing at all, aspiration allows us to focus what we're doing. Why? Because the most precious thing about the Dharma is that it leads to liberation. You can study 1,000,001 or 1,000,000,001 things in this world. You can study, hydroengineering, you can study literature, you can study languages, you can study carpentry, you can study anything you want. But why on earth did you come here today to study Dharma? You all had to have a reason, right? Did anyone just come here because someone told them to? Don't answer. This corner of the room doesn't get to answer. Did anybody just show up? That means everyone had a reason. That reason is usually related to how we want to live our life. I came to the Dharma not because I had a comfortable, wonderful life, but because I had some suffering. And I wanted to know how to answer it. I really needed to know how to deal with the suffering in my life. Because everything I'd tried before had not worked. And chances are, most of us have something similar. We've tried to find an answer many other ways, but somehow, I hope, the Dharma is working for us. So some energy brought you here, some intention brought you here. Maybe not for this gentleman, he's shaking his head. But now that you're here, what are you going to do with this energy next? You're going to keep it for yourself, which is kind of selfish. Or are you going to hope that it benefits this world? I leave it up to you. I suggest benefit. I just do. Why? Because none of us are separate from one another. This is the next, these 12 links of dependent origination, they talk very much about what's happening in one individual, right? But if you take this into the material realm, so we've talked about the mental aspect and sort of, this psychological aspect of these 12 links. But what if we talk about the world? Does anybody know who Son준스님 is from Chongtohae, Join Together Society? Some Koreans might know who he is. This is a monk that I respect enormously. He does these direct question, direct answer Dharma talks, and you can watch them on Buddhist television network sometimes. Tukmun Tuksol. I know a lot of the Koreans will have heard of this. He got a question the other day about gratitude, about how should I live my life, about gratitude. And he said something very interesting. It was some student who asked this question, and Son준스님 says, when you woke up this morning, what was your first thought? And this student says, I didn't really think anything. And Son준스님 says, you should be grateful. Why? Are you going to be able to eat breakfast? The student goes, yeah. Where did that breakfast come from? Well, my mom made it for me. Well, where did she get the rice? Well, she bought it at the store. Where did it come from? Well, someone had to grow it. Well, where did that grown rice come from? Well, it came from the earth. Well, only the earth? Well, no. Also, probably someone had, there's adequate amounts of water and sunlight and sufficient time and no disasters in the meantime to to disrupt the growing cycle. And then the rice ripened and someone harvested it and then dried it and then packaged it and sold it. And then because my parents work hard, they were able to buy it, and then there's rice on the table. So actually this rice came to me through a long process. of linked actions. So it's not just, things don't just happen in this world. Nothing just appears. Not even one thought just appears in the mind. There's this whole process behind even one thought. How much more so the material realm? How much effort does it take to get one bowl of rice? And you're just going to eat it like it doesn't matter? And this is what Pope 선준스님 says. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing you should think is, I am so grateful to be alive. I am so grateful for the air, for this body. You know, I turned 30 a couple of years ago, and I know it's not old. I do. I recognize this. I don't mean to, like, anybody who's over 30, I don't mean to put you off, but, like, for me, there was a really big difference in my body at 29 and my body at now 32. And wow, I really appreciate the strength and the stamina. I can't do forget all-nighters. I can't even stay up past 10 o'clock anymore, you know. It just doesn't happen. My body is changing. And I lived so recklessly as a kid. I acted like I was going to have, you know, a 20-year-old pulling all-nighter 2 times a week, kind of a body for the rest of my life. And now I can't stay up past 10. I had no gratitude for my situation then. None. No gratitude at all. We have no gratitude when we ignore the fact that nothing just happens, that everything comes to us through an intense series of interrelationships. You know, because everything is capable of change, that's actually why this world is even possible. I brought a whole bunch of quotes by Pema Chodron. Actually, I stole her title. Her title is Recognizing Reality. That's not my title. But you know, I brought a whole bunch of quotes from her because she's so great. She says, somehow in the process of trying to deny that things are always changing, which is ignorance, another definition of ignorance is ignoring the fact that things change, we lose our sense of the sacredness of life. When you realize that not even one thought, not even one cup of water comes without a previous action, without a previous action, without a previous action, without this long chain of relationships behind it. You know, again, we can be really intellectual about this. We can, you know, first it begins with ignorance, and then, you know, you have consciousness, and then you have this and that. Or we can get really physical. If you want to get physical with the mind, you need to sit meditation. But you can be physical with every single thing in your life. So Pope 선준스님 says, Pema Chodron says, have a sense of the sacred, which means recognize that everything is possible all the time. This is what change means. We think that change is something bad. It's not. It means that everything is infinitely possible. It means that if I walk in here and I decide that whatever energy I get from this Dharma talk, I'm going to take it and try and make something good in my life with it. We've already begun to change our direction towards something positive, towards the Dharma, towards helping others. This is only possible because nothing is permanent. If your state of mind were permanent, if you were in a bad mood, you would forever be in a bad mood and there would be no chance to change it whatsoever. How depressing is that? Everybody wants to be in a bad mood? That's depressing. The thought that I could never change my state of mind is really depressing. But if everything is always changing, that actually means that everything is always possible. And that makes practice possible. That means that you can change this world. And you change it by first recognizing that nothing exists in and of itself. Not a single thought, not a single object. We've got a doubter in the group. We've got a devil's advocate sitting back there, and I can just tell. But this is how I experience things. And you know, again, I'm not so great. You know, I tend to get really caught up in my regular, you know, everyday life. I tend to lose sight of gratitude. I tend to forget to pay attention. I didn't become a monastic because I was good at this. I became a monastic because I wanted to try harder. You know, that this for me was the form that would help me try. That's all. You know, that's all this means for me. This is my try mind right here. You know, and so, Pope 선준스님, be grateful. Recognize where every material thing in your life came from. Pema Chodron's recognize the sacredness of life. All this happens because 1, everything is always changing, so everything is always possible. And 2, everything is always interrelated. You know, all these 12 links of, you know, dependent origination point to is that everything shifts because it's a process, and everything changes because it's a process. And those are these two marks of, those are two of the three marks of existence. And again, we can take a negative view of this, the emptiness of the self, which is sometimes necessary because it can cut our attachment. You can also fall into the sacredness, trap, which is where everything is so important that you can't let go and you can't cut through that attachment. That's also not so good. So these things balance each other out. But again, for me, what often counteracts a slightly pessimistic, irritable personality is remembering to be grateful. Looking at the way things change and saying, this moment, because it will shift, because it came from causes and conditions, and because it will move into another state. That's what this old age, sickness, and death means. Birth, old age, sickness, and death. Yeah, the body's also born, the body dies, but also every moment is also arising and fading away, arising and fading away. This is life. Life changes, and it changes into death eventually. But that's not a problem. We only think it's a problem. It doesn't have to be. But when you become aware of this, rather than developing an apathetic attitude, my experience also is this, that actually you develop a great deal of joy. Because everything is very precious, just this moment. And when suffering comes, this is something that it took me 3 years of crying in Kangwon to learn. That suffering actually is not a bad thing. Suffering is not bad. One, because it teaches us. It shows us where we're stuck. When you're suffering, generally you're suffering because you're attached to something. I have two grandmothers. One of my grandmothers, she's, how to put this nicely, she's kind of a downer. Nothing ever works. She's always complaining. This, that, and the other thing. Oh, my aches. Oh, my pains. And then so-and-so said this. She doesn't take a very positive view. My other grandmother, who passed away, she had horrible knees. She had bad knees. She had bad eyesight. She had to have a lot of surgery. But I never once saw her complain, and every day for her was a good day. Her body had suffering, but her mind was not attached to that. Of course the body hurts, because that's what the body does. The body's like a car, it's going to break down. So what are you going to do? Get upset because it did what you knew it was going to do? Or you just accept that. This mind determines whether or not you're actually suffering. Pain is just pain. It's not good or bad. I have a brother, not a blood brother, but a Dharma brother. And we practiced together in America as lay people. And then he went and became a monk with Thich Nhat Hanh. And then I came to Korea. But he said one time, because I had horrible pain in my knees when I first started sitting. It was really, really difficult for me. My body had lots of suffering, and I was always really antsy. And, I would skip sitting sometimes because my body hurt too bad. And his name was Brother Pap Lu. I don't know the Vietnamese pronunciation very well. But anyway, Brother said one time, he said, pain doesn't bother me. I said, you've got to be kidding me. How can pain not bother you? And he said, it's just pain. Have you ever paid attention to the sensation? And I was like, no. Why would I want to do that? It hurts. He says, pay attention to it one time. If you just pay attention to that sensation, it becomes only a sensation. Here, this sensation, after contact, there comes sensation, after sensation is craving. He managed to cut off craving. Yeah, the body hurts. What about it? It's just what the body does. The body hurts sometimes, it feels good sometimes. So why don't you, my name is, at any rate, he used my lay name. So why don't you, Sunjun, give that a try? And I thought, he's got to be out of his mind. And actually, I never did it on the cushion. When I begin to practice this, paying attention to sensation, I get headaches, not migraines, but something else. Does anyone know what a cluster headache is? Okay, I get cluster headaches, and they're really, really awful. And I can't stop them. I've tried medicine, it doesn't work. So when one comes, it's just like, okay, I put the white flag up, I close the door, and I'm gone for the day. But for the first time in my life, the pain is really, really intense. I mean, truly intense. The stuff that happens with my knees when I'm sitting meditation doesn't compare. At this point, that's okay. I'd rather be in pain during meditation. But I get these headaches, and I just, there's nothing I can do. And I thought, I'm just going to try and pay attention to this. not trying to practice with it. I wasn't like, I'm going to be a good practitioner and pay attention to this. It's just like, I have nothing else to do now but watch this. I've tried medicine, it doesn't work, I just got to ride this thing out, and I just paid attention to it. And there came a moment, the first time I tried this with one of these headaches, when I didn't hate it for the first time ever. I mean, it wasn't pleasant. I'm not saying all of a sudden it was great, but that attachment, I want this gone, I want this, I mean, intense pain is like this, I want this gone, I want this gone. You really want the pain to end. That wanting dropped away. Yes, it hurt, and I was aware of that, but it was just, wow, this is pain. Just like you'd say, this is hot, this is cold. So, unfortunately, I didn't get to that point when I was, first sitting Zen, but later with this really strong physical sensation, finally I understood what it was to have physical pain, but not have mental suffering. And I can't always get there, it's hard, this is a practice, But for the first time I understood that's what Brother Paplu was talking about. This is what he meant when he said, just watch the sensation and don't attach to it. That was incredible. Because it cut off in that moment. It cut this cycle of constantly wanting something. And that was the first time, actually, that I understood how it's possible to not suffer, even in the middle of, say, physical difficulty and pain. And that's when I understood my grandmother's mind. And actually, the joke in my family, we call her Zen Master Grandma. I mean, she's passed away, but and my father and I jokingly, we call her Zen Master Grandma, because she had this ability already, somehow intuitively. Pain in the knees, eyesight going, cataracts, that's just life. And she didn't attach to it. So every day for her was a fruitful, good day. She was a very devout Christian. I still remember her sitting, when she got older. She died when she was over 90. She was this little hunched, little white-haired lady, and she would sit at the kitchen table doing her daily reading from the Gospels. And she never pushed her religion on anybody, but she had this very deep faith. And so for her, every day was a good day. Every day was a day that she could live again. And it was possible, and she was very involved in her community. She really gave back to her community. Wow. So that's what it means not to be attached to pain and to also have a mind of gratitude. So I learned more from my Christian grandmother than I learned from a lot of other people. But so gratitude is very important. Recognizing our relationships to everything. If we can realize that not even a single mental process happens without a previous step, without a previous step, without a previous step, and then we can begin to deal with our physical world in that way, that nothing comes about without having had a prior step or relationship to it, the next thing we can begin to do is realize how we begin to affect one another. Because that's what gratitude is in some way. That's the gratitude that Pope Nyunsnim was talking about. Thich Nhat Hanh Snim also talks about this kind of gratitude, that recognizing where things come from and being grateful for that relationship, then you begin to realize how things all work together. That if this food came to me through the hard work of many, many others, then I have to take this energy from this food and use it to do good work. I can use it to do bad things if I want, except that, generally speaking, doing bad things brings bad results. This is another Buddhist teaching that, you reap what you sow. So that, if you consistently commit negative actions, you make problems with people, and I'm not talking about ingratitude, I'm talking, lying or cheating or stealing or, taking life in any way. We talked a lot about correct action the last time that I gave a talk like this. So, if anybody was here for that, then you remember we talked a lot about the result that happens when you don't do something correct. You're shaking your head. Okay. On the other hand, if you take the energy that you get from something, the energy that you get from food, the energy that you get from an interaction with a teacher or a friend on the path, and you use it in a positive direction, then this begins to create a world full of benefit. How many people here are American citizens? I know that, I've been watching the news lately. there's some crazy stuff going on over there, you know, and a lot of things that, you know, a lot of the other Americans I talk to, what they're saying is, wow, you know, America's really, the situation is not so good. It's a very negative situation. I don't want to live there because, you know, obviously I deal mostly with a lot of expats because we're all living overseas. Well, we can think like that. The situation is bad. I should avoid it. Or we can think, situation is bad. I need to work that much harder to create a positive situation. And I don't mean you go out and start, you know, picketing people or trying to do big things. I mean you start with your own mind. You know, people often get attached to wanting to do something big and visible. That's actually big and visible, not big and visible. Big and visible. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is you start here. Yes?
How can we see reality if we have 75,000 thoughts per day? How can we stop the mind projecting to the past and the future in order to see reality, in order to see the concept? How can we see it?
I'm going to ask you the same question.
I don't know yet. Probably through the process of mindfulness, we observe another reality.
Another reality?
Not the concept of reality.
Don't make any ideas. Right now you're making two different things, the reality we have to see and the thoughts we're stuck in. Not necessary. Okay.
That after slowing down the mind, directing the mind to the positive future, it appears another reality. We define as inside of the reality. So how can we get out of that balance? If we are not capable of stopping the mind going to the positive future.
Don't make the idea of capable or incapable. If you say, I'm capable, I'm not capable, you've already made a division. Don't do that. Just watch. I'm serious. And just bring it to the breath. We don't need anything special. I mean, Buddhism has 1,000,001 amazing meditation methods. The Tibetans have all of these great things. Vipassana, all of these different things that you can do. All really great medicine. But the best medicine? Just breathe. Count your breaths. I made it to 3 a couple of times this morning. You want to try and make it to 10, just so you know. Count your breaths. 1, 2, 3. And if another thought comes or if you fall asleep and you lose it, go back to 1. Do this again and again and again and again for the rest of your life. And you don't need to think about trying to solve anything. You got to try this. Have you tried this? Keep trying. And find a teacher who can help guide you through this. I mean, is there a teacher you connect with? Okay. I mean, there are a lot of good teachers in Korea right now. You know, and I can suggest any number of names. It depends on if you speak Korean or not and how long you're in the country. But because often we get stuck and we need someone to kind of help pop us out of the rut that we're in. The most important thing, though, a teacher can't do your practice for you. This is why I'm telling you got to keep doing this. Even you find the best teacher on the planet, if you are not working yourself, you know, sitting down, coming to the breath, then your teacher can't help you with that. So a teacher helps get you out of a rut when you're stuck and answer some of your questions. But if you're not working yourself, then the best teacher in the world can't help you. But if you're working really, really hard, even the worst teacher in the world can help you. That means it's not dependent on the teacher, it's dependent on you. Okay? So if you feel like watching the breath is not helping, like if you're still not sure, on Sunday, tomorrow, go to Hwagesa and talk to the teacher there, because they can help you. Okay? The most important thing is, don't make any ideas. I can't, I can. The idea that yeah? Okay. Of course it's difficult. Of course it's difficult, but that's not a problem. It's like the pain in my grandma's knees. Difficulty is just what happens. Only when you make that a problem is it a problem. If it's, well, I have a hard time concentrating, okay, back to the breath. Don't follow that difficulty problem. train of thought. Don't go there. Just come back. Okay? Well, then if you know, do it. Most important thing, okay? Just try. That's all I'm saying. Just try. Okay. Hmm. Ah, okay. Yeah. But, okay. Thank you.
I think you need to